I invested $400,000 with my online boyfriend in cryptocurrency. It grew to over $1.5 million in profit in less than 2 weeks. Now I want to withdraw, and I have to pay more to withdraw. My name is Evelyn Marie Thompson, though back then, I was just Evelyn Marie Hayes, and I came into this world on a chilly March morning in 1953 in a little hospital in Decatur, Illinois. It was the kind of small Midwestern town where everybody knew everybody else, where the factory whistle blew at the same times every day, and life moved to the steady rhythm of hard work and simple pleasures. My father, Walter Hayes, was a mechanic at the Caterpillar plant. He had big, grease-stained hands that could fix anything with an engine, and he smelled perpetually of motor oil and Old Spice. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, you listened. He believed in providing for his family, in keeping the bills paid on time, and in putting a little something aside every week for a rainy day. That phrase stuck with me my whole life. My mother, Ruth, was a seamstress who took in piecework from the local dress shop and mended clothes for neighbors out of our kitchen. She had nimble fingers and an eye for detail. She could turn an old flour sack into a little girl-esque Sunday dress without batting an eye. Mama was the heart of our home, soft-spoken, endlessly patient, always humming hymns while she worked at her Singer sewing machine. She taught me how to hem a skirt, how to stretch a pound of ground beef into 3 meals, and most importantly, how dignity and kindness cost nothing but mean everything. We lived in a modest two-bedroom house on the edge of town, with a white clapboard exterior that Dad repainted every few years and a front porch where Mama kept geraniums in coffee cans. There was a big maple tree in the front yard that gave glorious shade in summer, and in fall its leaves turned the color of fire. Behind the house was a vegetable garden that fed us through the summers and into the winters with jars of tomatoes, green beans, and pickles lined up on shelves in the basement. Money was tight, but we never felt poor. Mama could make a pot of navy bean soup taste like a feast, and on Saturdays Dad would bring home day-old donuts from the bakery as a treat. Sundays meant Church First Baptist, where I sang in the Children Esquire, and then a big midday dinner with whatever roast was on sale. After dinner, we'd sit on the porch or in colder months around the radio listening to shows like The Lone Ranger or Amos and Andy. I was an only child, which was unusual for those days, but Mama had lost 2 babies before me and 2 after, so they decided I was their miracle and that was enough. Being the only one meant I had their full attention, but it also meant I learned early how to entertain myself reading library books under that maple tree, playing with paper dolls Mama cut from catalogs, or helping in the garden. I learned the satisfaction of watching something grow because of your own effort, whether it was a row of carrots or a neatly mended seam. By the time I was 10, I had my own little tin bank shaped like a piggy. And every nickel or dime I earned from returning pop bottles or helping neighbors went straight into it. Dad would match whatever I saved at the end of the year, saying, "A penny saved is a penny earned, Evie girl." That habit stuck. I watched Mama count out the grocery money each week, making sure we never spent more than we had. And I saw how proud Dad was when he could put an extra $20 into the savings account at the bank downtown. Those early years weren't glamorous, but they were solid. They taught me that security wasn't about having a lot, it was about managing what you did have with care and foresight. Little did I know then how those lessons would shape the rest of my life, the comfortable home I'd build with Harold, the careful investments we'd make, and eventually the desperate risks I'd take when loneliness made me forget every hard-earned rule my parents had instilled in me. But that's getting ahead of myself. Back in Decatur, under that big maple tree with a library book in my lap, and the smell of Mama's fresh baked bread drifting through the screen door, life felt safe, predictable, and full of quiet promise. I had no idea how precious those simple days would one day seem. Chapter 2. Meeting Harold. I was 22 years old in the summer of 1975, working as a teller at the First National Bank on Main Street in Decatur. It wasn't glamorous counting deposits, balancing drawers, smiling politely at customers who sometimes treated tellers like vending machines, but it was steady work, and I liked the order of it. Numbers had to add up, drawers had to balance to the penny, and there was satisfaction in making everything line up just right at the end of the day. That's where I met Harold Thompson. He came in one humid Friday afternoon, just before closing, wearing a neatly pressed white shirt with the sleeves rolled up and a narrow tie loosened at the collar. He was 25, tall but not towering, with sandy brown hair that he kept combed back and a pair of wire-rimmed glasses that made him look serious in the most gentle way. He carried a folder of payroll checks for the small accounting firm where he worked, and when he stepped up to my window, he smiled, not the quick impersonal smile most customers gave, but a real one that reached his hazel eyes. "Good afternoon, miss," he said, sliding the checks across the counter. "I hope I'm not too late." His voice was calm, Midwestern, with just a hint of a drawl from growing up in southern Illinois. I remember thinking he sounded like someone you could trust with your secrets. "You're just in time," I told him, stamping the deposit slip. Our fingers brushed for half a second when he handed me the pen to sign the receipt, and I felt a little flutter I hadn't expected. He came in every Friday after that, always at the same time, always with payroll for his firm. Sometimes he'd linger a moment longer than necessary, asking about the weather or whether the bank was busy. That day, I'd find myself looking forward to Fridays in a way I never had before. One evening in early September, as the bank was locking up, I walked out the side door. And there he was, leaning against the brick wall with his hands in his pockets. "Evelyn," he said, he'd learned my name from my nameplate weeks earlier. "Would you let me buy you a cup of coffee at the diner across the street? If you're not in a hurry, that is." I should have been cautious. Nice girls didn't just go off with strange men in those days. But there was something so earnest about him, so respectful, that I heard myself say yes before I could overthink it. We sat in a red vinyl booth at the Decatur diner, sipping coffee and sharing a slice of cherry pie. He told me he'd grown up on a farm near Carbondale, the youngest of 4 boys, and that he'd worked his way through the University of Illinois with scholarships and night jobs. Accounting wasn't his passion, he admitted, but it was practical. And he was good with figures. "I like when things balance," he said, echoing something I'd always felt myself. I told him about my parents, about helping Mama with sewing on weekends, about saving every extra dollar. He listened like he really wanted to know me, not just polite nodding, but real listening. When the diner started stacking chairs around us, he walked me to my bus stop and asked, very formally, if he could call on me the following Saturday. Our courtship was old-fashioned, even for the 70s. He'd pick me up in his sensible blue Chevy Impala, always on time, always opening the car door for me. We'd go to the movies. He loved historical dramas. I loved anything with Audrey Hepburn, or drive out to the lake for picnics Mama packed in a wicker basket. He met my parents early on. Dad sized him up quietly over coffee, but Mama liked him right away because he complimented her apple pie and meant it. Harold wasn't flashy. He didn't have a big personality that filled a room, but he was steady, thoughtful, and kind in a way that felt rare. He remembered little things, that I liked my coffee with just a dash of cream, that gardenias were my favorite flower, that I got quiet when I was worried about money. He'd bring me a single gardenia, sometimes wrapped in damp paper towel, and it meant more than a dozen roses ever could have. 8 months after that first cup of coffee, on a crisp April evening in 1976, he took me back to the lake where we'd had so many picnics. The sun was setting over the water, turning everything gold and pink. He got out of the car, came around to open my door like always, but this time he seemed nervous, fidgeting with his tie, clearing his throat. "Evelyn," he said, taking both my hands, "I don't have much to offer you right now, just a steady job, a little savings, and a whole lot of plans. But I promise you this. If you'll marry me, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to worry about tomorrow. We'll build something solid together, you and me." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a modest diamond engagement ring, nothing extravagant, but it sparkled in the sunset like it held all the promise in the world. I said yes before he even finished asking. We were married that October in the same First Baptist church where I'd sung in the Children Esquire. Mama made my dress simple white satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Dad walked me down the aisle. Harold's eyes filled with tears when he saw me, and I knew right then that I'd made the best decision of my life. Looking back, that is what Harold gave me from the very beginning. Not excitement or grand romance like in the movies, but something deeper: security wrapped in love. He was my safe place, my partner in every sense, and for 44 years, until the day his heart gave out, he kept every promise he made that evening by the lake. I didn't know then how much I would one day miss the simple weight of his hand in mine, or how empty life could feel without him. But that's a later chapter. For now, all I knew was that I'd found the man I wanted to build a life with, one careful, loving brick at a time. Building a comfortable life. Harold and I started our married life in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store on the east side of Decatur. The rent was $85 a month, the walls were thin, and on Saturday nights we could hear the jukebox from the tavern downstairs thumping through the floorboards. But it was ours, and we loved it. We painted the kitchen a cheerful yellow, hung Mama's old lace curtains at the windows, and set up a card table as our dining room until we could afford something better. On our first night there, Harold carried me over the threshold like in the movies, even though the threshold was just a worn strip of linoleum, and we laughed until we cried. Money was tight those first few years. Harold's starting salary at the accounting firm was modest, and my teller job paid even less, but we had a plan. Every payday we followed what we called the three-pile system. The first pile went to bills and rent always paid on time, no exceptions. The second pile was for groceries and necessities. Whatever was left became the third pile, savings. Even if it was only $10 or $20, it went straight into a joint savings account at the bank where I worked. Harold said, "We're not saving what's left after spending. We're spending what's left after saving." That became our motto. We were frugal in ways that seem almost comical now. I'd clip coupons from the newspaper every Sunday, and we'd plan our weekly menu around whatever was on sale. Harold would drive an extra mile if it meant gas was 2 cents cheaper per gallon. We bought our furniture. Secondhand, a sturdy oak dining table from an estate sale, a sofa that needed reupholstering but had good bones. I sewed new covers for the cushions myself, using fabric Mama helped me choose from the remnant bin. On Saturday mornings we'd go to garage sales, hunting for treasures, a set of Pyrex mixing bowls for a quarter, a perfectly good lawn mower for $5. We weren't deprived. We were proud of how clever we were with every dollar. Harold's real gift, though, was seeing opportunity where others saw only routine. In 1979, when interest rates were sky high, he noticed that the credit union where he did some freelance bookkeeping was offering certificates of deposit at nearly 15%. We scraped together $2,000 almost every penny of our savings and locked it in for 5 years. When it matured, we had enough for the down payment. On our first house, a modest 3-bedroom brick ranch in a quiet neighborhood on the north side of town. It needed work-peeling wallpaper, outdated kitchen cabinets, a backyard that was mostly dirt but the structure was sound, and the mortgage payment was only a little more than our old rent. The day we signed the papers, Harold took me to the empty living room, spun me around like we were dancing, and said, "This is just the beginning." Evie, he was right. Over the next decades, we poured love and elbow grease into that house. Harold refinished the hardwood floors himself, sanding them on his hands and knees one summer. I wallpapered and painted, planted roses along the front walk, and turned the backyard dirt patch into a garden with tomatoes, zinnias, and a small patch of strawberries that the neighborhood kids loved to raid. We added a sunroom off the kitchen in 1987, paid for with bonuses Harold earned during tax season. It became my favorite place, filled with light, overlooking the garden, where I'd sit with my morning coffee and watch the birds at the feeder. While we fixed up the house, Harold kept his eye on bigger opportunities. In the early 80s, when the stock market was still recovering from the 70s slump, he started investing small amounts in mutual funds, nothing risky, just steady blue-chip companies. He'd read the Wall Street Journal every evening after dinner, making notes in the margins, slow and steady. He'd remind me when I worried about market dips. We're not gambling. We're planting seeds. Those seeds grew. By the mid-90s, our portfolio had grown enough that we could buy a small rental property downtown, a 2-unit duplex near the university. We managed it ourselves at first, fixing leaky faucets and painting between tenants, but the rental income gave us breathing room we'd never had before. We weren't flashy with our growing comfort. We never bought a new car until the old one was truly worn out. Our vacations were road trips to national parks or visits to Harold's brothers in southern Illinois. But we were secure. We paid off the house early in 2002, celebrating with a quiet dinner at home and a single bottle of good champagne. By the time Harold retired at 65, we had a healthy retirement account, the rental property bringing in steady monthly checks, treasury bonds for safety, and enough in savings that I never had to worry about unexpected expenses. People sometimes assumed we'd inherited money or struck it lucky, but it was nothing so dramatic. It was decades of small choices. Skipping restaurant meals to put an extra $50 into investments, driving cars until they had 200,000 miles, saying no to things we wanted so we could say yes to peace of mind later. Harold used to say, "Wealth isn't about having everything you want today. It's about having choices tomorrow, and we did have choices. We could help my aging parents with medical bills without hesitation. We could donate to the church building fund. We could sleep at night knowing the bills were paid and the future was padded. Looking back, those years of building were some of the happiest of my life. The money mattered. Yes, it kept the wolf from the door, but what mattered more was the partnership. Harold and I were a team, dreaming and planning side by side. Every brick in that ranch house, every dividend check, every rosebush in the garden felt like proof of our shared effort. I never imagined a day would come when I'd risk it all on the promise of quick millions. Back then, surrounded by the quiet evidence of our careful life, such recklessness would have seemed impossible, but loneliness has a way of eroding even the strongest foundations, and I didn't yet know how hollow the house and my heart would feel without Harold beside me. Losing Harold, it was a perfectly ordinary Thursday morning in September 2020. The kind of early fall day in Illinois when the air is crisp but the sun still feels warm on your face. The maple tree in the front yard had just begun to turn, a few leaves drifting down like slow red snowflakes. Harold woke up at his usual time, 6:30. Sharp kissed my forehead while I was still half asleep and whispered, "Coffee's on in 10, Evie." I mumbled something affectionate and dozed a little longer, listening to the familiar sounds of him moving around the house. The creak of the bedroom door, his slippers shuffling down the hallway, the soft clink of mugs in the kitchen. By 7:15 I was up, wrapped in my favorite chenille robe, and we sat together in the sunroom. As always, he was wearing the old gray cardigan I'd bought him for Christmas years ago, the one with the leather patches on the elbows that were now shiny from use. We talked about nothing important, the tomatoes that needed picking before the first frost, whether we should repaint the guest bedroom, the new pastor's sermon from Sunday. He teased me about leaving my gardening gloves on the porch railing again. I pretended to be annoyed, but I loved the gentle rhythm of it after 44 years. Our conversations were like a well-worn path, comfortable, familiar, and still somehow full of light. Harold finished his coffee, rinsed his mug in the sink, and said, "I'm going to mow the lawn before it gets too hot. Back in an hour, and then we'll have that French toast you like." He kissed the top of my head, the way he always did, and walked out the back door. I watched him through the window as he pulled the mower from the shed, checked the gas, and gave me a little wave before starting it up. The roar of the engine filled the quiet morning, and I turned to the newspaper, smiling to myself. Everything felt right with the world. I never saw him alive again. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. The mower had gone silent some time ago, but I assumed he'd stopped to weed the flower beds or chat with Mr. Jenkins next door, the way he often did. When 2 hours had gone by, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I went to the back door and called his name. No answer. I stepped outside in my slippers. The mower sat idle in the middle of the yard, grass clippings scattered around it like confetti. And there, on the ground beside the maple tree he loved so much, lay Harold on his side, one arm outstretched, as if he'd simply decided to rest. I ran to him, screaming his name, dropping to my knees in the damp grass. His skin was still warm, but his eyes were closed, his face peaceful in a way that terrified me more than anything else. I fumbled for my phone, dialed 911 with shaking hands, and tried to remember the CPR class we'd taken years ago at the senior center. I pushed on his chest, breathed into his mouth, begged him to come back over and over until the paramedics arrived and gently pulled me away. They worked on him for what felt like forever, right there on our lawn while neighbors gathered at a respectful distance. But the doctor at the hospital confirmed what I already knew in my bones. Massive heart attack, instantaneous. He hadn't suffered, they said. He'd been gone before he hit the ground. The days that followed were a blur of kindness and cruelty. Kindness from friends bringing casseroles and sitting with me in silence. Cruelty from the silence itself when they left. I kept expecting Harold to walk through the door, complaining about the traffic from the funeral home or asking what was for supper. I'd catch a glimpse of his cardigan hanging on the back of the kitchen chair, and feel my heart stop all over again. We buried him on a beautiful autumn afternoon in the cemetery just outside town, the one with the rolling hills and the old oaks. I chose the plot under a young sugar maple so that every fall he'd be surrounded by the colors he loved. The service was simple hymns we'd sung together in church, a few words from the pastor, stories from his brothers and old colleagues. I wore the navy dress he always said brought out my eyes, and I placed a single gardenia from our yard on his casket before they lowered it. People told me I was strong, I was hollow. I went through the motions, thank you notes for the flowers, sorting through paperwork, donating his clothes to the church thrift shop, but every task felt like ripping off his cab. The house, once so full of our shared life, became a museum of memories. His reading glasses still sat on the nightstand, his coffee mug navy blue with a tiny chip on the rim was still in the cupboard. The lawnmower stayed in the shed for weeks because I couldn't bear to look at it. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in our bed, my bed now staring at the ceiling, reaching instinctively for his side only to find cold sheets. I'd talk to him anyway, telling him about my day, asking his advice on whether to sell the rental property or keep it. Some nights I cried until I was sick. Other nights I was too numb for tears. I learned a new language: widow, widow's benefits, widow's grief group, widow's fog. Everything was widow now, as if that single word defined me more than 44 years of marriage ever had. The finances, at least, were in order. Harold had seen to that. The accounts were joint, the will was clear, the life insurance paid out quickly. I wouldn't have to worry about money, but money couldn't fill the silence at the breakfast table or warm the empty side of the bed. It couldn't mow the lawn or tease me about my gardening gloves. 5 years have passed since that September morning, and the pain has changed shape. It's no longer the sharp, breathless agony of the early days. It's a quieter ache, like a bruise that never quite heals. I can speak of him now without crying most of the time. I can laugh at memories instead of only weeping over them. But the loneliness, that settled in deep like frost in the ground. It waited patiently while I grieved, and then, when the acute sorrow began to soften, it stepped forward and claimed the empty spaces Harold used to fill. I didn't know it then, but that loneliness would one day make me vulnerable in ways I could never have imagined. It would whisper that I was only half alive, that I deserved companionship. Again, that a kind voice on the other end of a message could be trusted. But that's for the chapters still to come. For now, all I knew was that the man who had been my home for 44 years was gone, and I was left in a beautiful, paid-off house that suddenly felt far too large for one broken heart. The weight of loneliness after Harold was gone, the house didn't just feel empty. It felt wrong, like a song played in the wrong key. Every room carried echoes of him, but none carried his presence. The sunroom, where we'd spent so many mornings with coffee and the newspaper, became the hardest place to be. I'd sit there out of habit, mug in hand, and realize halfway through that I was waiting for him to turn the page or comment on some article. The silence would crash, and then, heavy and absolute, I started taking my coffee in the kitchen instead, standing at the counter like I was in a hurry, even when I had nowhere to go. The days stretched long and shapeless. I'd awake at the same time. Old habits die hard, but there was no one to say good morning to. I'd make the bed on both sides anyway, smoothing his pillow because leaving it dented felt like admitting he wasn't coming back. Breakfast was a single poached egg instead of the two we used to share. Or sometimes just toast I didn't taste. I'd force myself through chores, dusting shelves that weren't dusty, watering plants that were already soaked, folding laundry that could have waited another week, anything to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't wander too far into the void. Neighbors and church friends were kind at first. Casseroles appeared on the porch like clockwork the first month: tuna noodle, chicken and rice, lasagna big enough for a family of 6. People stopped by to sit with me, to reminisce about Harold, to make sure I was eating. But kindness has an expiration date when grief doesn't. After a while the visits slowed, then stopped. Everyone had their own lives, grandchildren, health issues, holidays to plan. I understood. I didn't want to be the sad widow they felt obligated to check on. So I smiled, said I was fine, and closed the door on their retreating backs with a heart that felt heavier each time. I tried to fill the hours. I volunteered more at the library, shelving books and reading to preschoolers during story hour. I joined a grief support group at the church, sitting in a circle of folding chairs with other widows and widowers who nodded knowingly when I spoke. It helped a little, hearing that others woke up reaching for someone who wasn't there, that others talked to empty rooms. But when the hour ended and we all filed out to our separate cars, the loneliness followed me home like a shadow. Evenings were the worst. Harold and I had always had our routine. Supper together I still cooked for 2 out of habit, then wrapped half for a freezer that was already full. Maybe a show on television with his arm around my shoulders, then reading in bed until lights out at 10. Now supper was something microwaved and eaten over. The sink, The television stayed off because every commercial for life insurance or retirement planning felt like a personal attack. I'd sit in the living room with a book in my lap, reading the same paragraph over and over, listening to the grandfather clock tick in the hall, the one Harold had wound faithfully every Sunday night. Sleep became a stranger. I'd lie in the dark, eyes wide open, replaying that last morning, the kiss on my forehead, the smell of coffee, the wave from the backyard. I'd wonder if there had been signs I missed, a shortness of breath he'd dismissed as allergies, a tiredness he'd blamed on yard work, guilt and what if circled like vultures. Some nights I'd get up and wander the house, touching his things, the worn leather of his wallet still on the dresser, the half-used tube of Brill cream in the bathroom cabinet, the stack of history books with his careful underlines. I'd end up in the sunroom, staring out at the dark garden, crying quietly so the neighbors wouldn't hear. Money, at least, wasn't a worry. Harold had left everything in perfect order, accounts balanced, bills on autopay, a folder labeled for Evelyn with every password and policy number neatly listed. The rental property kept sending checks, the investments kept growing slowly and steadily. I could have traveled, taken cruises, spoiled, nieces and nephews rotten, but none of it interested me without someone to share it with. I'd look at brochures for senior tours, Italy, the Canadian Rockies, an Alaskan cruise like the one we'd loved, and feel a wave of exhaustion. What was the point of seeing beautiful places if there was no one to turn to and say, "Look at that"? I made efforts. I joined a book club at the library, went to senior center luncheons, even tried a dance class for active adults. But I always felt like an extra piece in someone else's puzzle. Couples sat together, finishing each other's sentences. Widows like me clustered at the edges, smiling politely. I'd come home feeling more isolated than before I left. Technology became both lifeline and torment. I'd scroll through Facebook for hours, looking at pictures of my few remaining friends with their grandchildren, or old classmates on cruises with their spouses. Everyone seemed paired, purposeful, alive in a way I no longer felt. I posted rarely just birthday wishes or photos of the garden, but even those felt forced. I joined an online group for widows, reading posts late at night from women all over the country who understood the particular ache of an empty bed or a silent kitchen. It helped to know I wasn't alone in my aloneness, but it also underscored how widespread the emptiness was. By the third year, the sharp edges of grief had dulled into a constant low hum of loneliness. I functioned, I paid bills, tended the garden though with less joy, went to church every Sunday and sat in our old pew alone. People stopped asking how I was holding up and started treating me like the capable widow I appeared to be. But inside, I was shrinking. The house felt larger every year, the rooms echoing with absence. I caught myself talking to Harold out loud more and more, telling him about the price of gas, asking whether he thought the roses needed pruning. It wasn't crazy. It was survival. I began to understand that loneliness isn't just being alone. It's being unseen, unneeded. It's having no one waiting for you to come home, no one whose day is brightened by your voice. It's celebrating your birthday with a store-bought cake and a single candle because lighting more feels like pretending. It's realizing that entire days can pass without speaking a word aloud. I told myself I was lucky. I had my health mostly, a comfortable home, enough money to last. Many widows my age struggled terribly, but gratitude and loneliness can coexist, and mine did side by side every single day. I didn't know it yet, but that deep, aching solitude was quietly reshaping me. It was making me vulnerable to kindness, to attention, to the illusion of connection. It was preparing the ground for someone to step in and offer exactly what I missed most. Someone to talk to, someone who seemed to care, someone who made me feel visible again. The loneliness didn't just weigh on me, it hollowed me out, leaving space for desperation I didn't yet recognize. And into that space, one ordinary evening, a message would arrive that felt like sunlight after years of gray. Chapter 7. Searching for Connection. By the fourth year without Harold, the loneliness had become a constant companion, as familiar as my own heartbeat. I functioned well enough on the outside, garden tended, bills paid, church attendance regular, but inside, I was starving for something I couldn't quite name. Not just conversation, though I missed that desperately. I missed being known. I missed mattering to someone in the small daily ways that make up a life. Someone noticing I'd had a bad night, someone asking how my day went and really wanting to hear the answer. I tried the usual things widows are told to try. The senior center had a widow's lunch and every month little finger sandwiches and iced tea in the fellowship hall, followed by a guest speaker on topics like downsizing your home or staying active after loss. I went faithfully for a while. The women were kind, many of them in the same boat, but after the plates were cleared, we all went back to our separate houses and separate silences. I joined a walking group that met at the park 3 mornings a week. We'd do 2 laps around the lake, chatting about grandchildren and recipes, but the talk stayed safely on the surface. No one wanted to weigh the group down with the deeper ache, and I didn't blame them. I took classes, 2 watercolor painting at the community college, a memoir writing workshop at the library. I wasn't particularly talented at either, but I liked the structure, the excuse to leave the house. In the painting class, I produced a series of competent but uninspired landscape sunsets over lakes, gardens in bloom that the instructor praised politely. In the writing group, we read our pieces aloud, and when I wrote about Harold's last morning, the room went quiet in that uncomfortable way that made me wish I'd chosen something lighter. After that, I stuck to reminiscences about childhood Christmases. Technology became my hesitant lifeline. I'd had a computer for years. Harold had insisted we get one in the early 2000s so he could track investments online, but I'd mostly used it for email and looking up recipes. After he died, I spent more time online, first out of sleeplessness, then out of hunger for connection. I set up a Facebook account and friended the few people I knew, women from church, a couple of nieces, old classmates I hadn't seen in decades. I'd scroll through their posts late at night vacations, grandbabies, anniversary dinners, and feel a pang that was part envy, part sorrow. Everyone seemed to have someone. I posted sparingly, a photo of my roses in June, a picture of the first snowfall, a memory of Harold on our anniversary. The likes and comments were kind, but they were fleeting, 30 seconds of attention, then gone. One evening, after a particularly quiet Sunday in which I'd spoken fewer than 20 words aloud, I searched online for widow support groups. I found a national forum called Widow's Journey message boards where women and a few men shared everything from practical advice on taxes to raw confessions of grief. I lurked for weeks, reading posts at AM when sleep wouldn't come. Stories of first holidays alone, of selling the marital bed because it was too big, of crying in the grocery store over a brand of coffee only their spouse had liked. It was the first place I felt truly understood. No one there expected me to be strong or moving on. They just knew. Eventually, I made an account Evelyn1953 and posted my first message. A short note about how hard Sundays were now that church was over and the house went silent again. The responses came quickly. Sundays are the worst for me too. I play music all day just to hear another voice. You're not alone, Evelyn. For the first time in years, I cried tears that felt almost cleansing. I started posting more about missing Harold's teasing, about the garden feeling like too much work some days, about the strange guilt of laughing at a television show. Women wrote back with their own stories, private messages offering virtual hugs. It wasn't the same as a real hand to hold, but it was something. I branched out to other corners of the internet. I joined a gardening forum where I could post photos of my roses and get advice on black spot. I found a group for fans of old movies and chimed in about Casablanca and the shop around the corner films Harold and I had watched a dozen times. I even tried Zoom calls with a few widows from the support group who lived scattered across the Midwest. We'd log on once a month, mugs of tea in hand, and talk for 2 hours straight. Their faces on the screen felt like real company, even if the connection glitched sometimes. But there were limits. Online friends couldn't drop by with a casserole when I was sick. They couldn't sit beside me in church or walk with me around the lake. And most of them were wrestling with their own loneliness. No one had the energy to become a true day-to-day companion. I understood. We were all treading water, trying not to sink. I began to notice something dangerous in myself, a growing hunger for attention, any attention. When someone commented on one of my garden photos, I'd feel a little rush. When a private message popped up from another widow saying, "I thought of you today," my heart would lift in a way it hadn't in years. I told myself it was harmless. I was just connecting with people who understood. One night, restless and scrolling through the Widows Forum, I saw a thread titled "Finding Love Again After Loss." Some women swore they'd never date, that their late husbands were the only ones for them. Others shared cautious stories of meeting widowers at church or through friends' coffee dates, slow courtships, second chances. A few warned about online dating. Be careful, there are scammers who prey on us. I read those warnings, nodded to myself, and thought, that won't be me. I'm too smart for that. I wasn't looking for romance. Truly, I wasn't. I told myself I was content with my online groups, my garden, my quiet routines. But deep down, in a place I barely admitted to myself, I missed being someone's someone. I missed good morning texts and someone asking about my day. I missed feeling pretty, feeling wanted, feeling alive in that particular way only a partner can make you feel. So when, a few months later, I received a friend request from a man whose profile picture showed a kind-faced widower with silver hair and a gentle smile, I didn't delete it right away. His name was Richard, he commented. On a post ID made in the widowess group about missing Harold's homemade lasagna. That sounds like a memory worth keeping, he'd written. My late wife loved Italian food too. I hovered over the accept button for a long time. I didn't know it then, but that single click was the beginning of everything falling apart. The loneliness had done its work. It had made me soft, hopeful, and without realizing it desperate for the exact kind of attention a stranger on the internet was perfectly positioned to offer. The first message, it was a Tuesday evening in early spring, one of those damp gray days when the sky seems to press down on the house and the garden is still mostly brown sticks waiting for life to return. I'd spent the afternoon pruning the roses later than I should have, but I needed the distraction and my hands smelled of sap and soil. After a shower and a simple supper of soup from the freezer, I settled into Harold's old recliner with my tablet, the one I'd bought myself the year before so I could read library books without getting up. The house was quiet except for the tick of the clock and the occasional creak of old wood settling. I opened Facebook out of habit, scrolled through the usual posts, someone's new grandbaby, a church friend sharing a devotional, a high school classmate complaining about the weather, and then tapped over to the Widow's Journey group. That night there was a thread about food memories, women sharing recipes their husbands had loved, or dishes they could no longer make because the smell brought back too much. ID posted earlier in the week about Harold's lasagna, the way he'd make the sauce from scratch with tomatoes we deaconed together. How he always added a little extra oregano and teased me for stealing bites from the pan while it baked. A few people had commented with hearts and their own stories, and I'd replied politely, grateful for the small sense of connection. That's when the private message notification appeared in the corner of the screen. I almost ignored it. The group was private, but men sometimes wandered in, widowers mostly, looking for the same comfort we all were. I'd had a few polite exchanges before, nothing more. But the profile picture caught my eye, a silver-haired man in a light blue button-down shirt, standing outdoors with mountains behind him, smiling in a way that looked genuine, not posed. His name was Richard Caldwell. I clicked. The message was short and gentle. Good evening, Evelyn. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I saw your post about your husband's lasagna, and it touched me. My late wife, Laura, loved Italian food too. She made a mean manicotti that I've never been able to replicate. Those little food memories are bittersweet, aren't they? They hurt, but they keep our loved ones close. Anyway, I just wanted to say I enjoyed reading your memory. Take care, nothing pushy. No, you look beautiful, or I'd love to chat, just a shared understanding. I read it twice, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me, the cautious part Harold had helped cultivate, whispered to leave it alone. But another part, the lonely part, that had been growing louder every year, felt warmed by the simple kindness of being seen. Someone had read my words and cared enough to respond privately. I typed back before I could overthink it. Thank you, Richard. You're right, they are bittersweet. I still make Harold's lasagna sometimes, but it's never quite the same without him at the table. I'm sorry about your Laura. How long has it been for you? I hit send, set the tablet on the ottoman, and went to rinse my tea mug, telling myself it was just polite conversation. When I came back, there was already a reply. 7 years this coming June. Some days it feels like yesterday, others like a lifetime. I live alone in a big house in Texas now, too big, really, and I rattle around in it like a marble in a jar. I've tried keeping busy with gardening roses like you, but evenings are the hardest. Do you find that too? I sat back down, pulled the Afghan over my knees, and read his words again. Texas, roses, evenings the hardest. It was as if he'd reached right into my own quiet house and named the ache I carried. We messaged back and forth for over an hour that night, small things at first. He told me he'd been an engineer in the oil industry, retired. Now, that Laura had been a school librarian and they'd never had children either. That he'd learned to cook after she passed because ready meals got old fast. I told him about Harold's accounting career, our travels, how I still set to places at the table sometimes out of habit. He never flirted outright, never asked for my phone number or suggested moving off the app. He just listened, really listened in the way people do when they've walked the same hard road. When he wrote, "It sounds like Harold was a good man, Evelyn. You were lucky to have each other," I felt tears prick my eyes. No one had said it quite like that in years. Around 10:30 I typed, "I should head to bed early, riser out of habit." He replied immediately, "Of course, thank you for chatting with me tonight. It's been nicer than I can say. Sleep well, Evelyn." I turned off the tablet and sat in the dim living room for a long time, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, a little spark of anticipation. Not romance, not yet, maybe not ever, but the simple knowledge that someone out there was thinking about me as they turned off their own lights. The next morning there was a new message waiting. A simple good morning with a photo of a sunrise over what he said was his back pasture, streaks of pink and orange across a wide Texas sky. "Thought you might like this. Coffee's on here too." I smiled, actually smiled at my kitchen table. I took a picture of my own coffee mug beside the window, the garden still sleepy outside, and sent it back with "Good morning to you too. Beautiful sunrise." And just like that, a routine began. Good morning messages with photos of skies or gardens or whatever small beauty we'd noticed. Good night messages that sometimes stretched into long conversations about books, old movies, favorite hymns, the way grief ambushes you in grocery aisles. He sent me a recipe for the manicotti Laura used to make. I sent him Harold's lasagna instructions, complete with the extra oregano note. He told me about planting a new rose bed and asked my advice on varieties. I confessed that some days I didn't get out of my robe until noon, and he admitted the same. It was safe, slow, and gentle, like corresponding with a pen pal from a kinder era. I told myself it was just friendship, two lonely widowers keeping each other company across the miles. Nothing more, but every time that little notification chime sounded, my heart lifted in a way it hadn't since Harold's last morning. I started looking forward to evenings again. I'd catch myself choosing a nicer sweater on days when we planned to video call for the first time just to see if the faces matched the pictures, we both said. I didn't tell anyone, not Martha, not my nieces, not the women in the grief group. It felt too fragile, too private, and deep down, in a place I barely admitted. I was afraid if I spoke it aloud someone would warn me, and the small warmth I'd found would vanish. Looking back, I see how perfectly he played it. No pressure, no rush. Just steady kindness that filled the exact hollow places in my heart. He offered attention without demand, understanding without judgment. He made me laugh with gentle stories about his dog who stole socks, or his failed attempts at sourdough during the pandemic. He made me feel seen again, and that more than anything is how the hook was set. Not with grand promises or flattery, but with the quiet daily gift of being remembered, of mattering to someone, even across 1,000 miles of wire and screen. I didn't know yet that every word was calculated, every photo chosen, every story rehearsed. All I knew was that for the first time in 5 long years, the evenings felt a little less heavy, and when I turned off the light at night, I wasn't quite as alone in the dark, falling in love online. Those first few weeks with Richard felt like waking up after a long, cold sleep. The messages started as a gentle trickle, good mornings, good nights, little shares about our days, but soon they became a steady stream I found myself checking for constantly. I'd catch myself smiling at my phone in the grocery store checkout line or hurrying through watering the garden so I could sit on the patio and reply without distraction. It had been so long since anyone waited for my words that I felt almost giddy. We moved from Facebook messages to a private chat app. He suggested something more direct, he said, with better video quality. The first video call was nerve-wracking. I fussed more than I cared to admit, a touch of lipstick, a nicer blouse, brushing my hair twice. When his face appeared on the screen, silver hair neatly combed, those kind blue eyes crinkling at the corners, a soft flannel shirt open at the collar, I felt a rush of relief. He looked exactly like his photos, maybe even a little more handsome in motion. His voice was warm, with a faint Texas drawl that made everything sound reassuring. "Evelyn," he said, smiling wide, "you're even prettier than your pictures let on." I laughed and waved him off, but inside I glowed. No one had called me pretty in years. We talked for 2 hours, that first call about everything and nothing. He showed me around his house on the camera, a spacious ranch-style home with wooden beams, bookshelves full of engineering texts and history books just like Harold's. A kitchen with copper pots hanging over an island. He took me out to the back porch to see the sunset painting the sky over his acreage. Wish you were here to see it in person, he said quietly, and I felt my heart skip. From then on, the calls became daily. Mornings if he was up early checking his garden, evenings after supper when the light was soft. He'd send photos throughout the day, his coffee on the porch railing, a new rose blooming, his golden retriever named Max asleep on the couch with one paw over his nose. I sent back pictures of my own garden, my latest baking attempt, a lopsided lemon pound cake, the cardinals at my feeder. He always responded quickly, always with enthusiasm. Those roses are stunning, better than mine. Or that cake looks delicious. Save me a slice when I visit. And he did talk about visiting, not in a pushy way, but gently, like a promise being planted. Once the weather warms up, I'll drive up, he'd say. I've always wanted to see Illinois in the spring. We could have coffee in that sunroom you described, walk in your garden. I'd picture it vividly, him stepping out of his truck tall and solid, pulling me into a hug that smelled of Texas sunshine. I'd lie awake some nights imagining the feel of his hand in mine, the sound of a man's voice in the house again. He told me stories about his life that felt tailor-made to echo mine. How Laura had loved gardening too, how they'd traveled the national parks just like Harold and I had. He'd lost her to cancer 7 years ago, slowly, painfully, and he spoke of it with quiet sorrow that made my own grief feel shared rather than solitary. Some days. I still expect to hear her humming in the kitchen, he said once, voice thick, but talking to you. It's the first time in years the house doesn't feel quite so empty. I opened up in ways I hadn't with anyone. I told him about the mornings I still set to coffee mugs out of habit, about crying in the grocery store when I passed Harold's favorite cereal. I admitted how lonely the evenings were, how I sometimes left the television on just for noise, and every time he listened without rushing to fix. He'd say things like, "That makes perfect sense, sweetheart," or "I do the exact same thing with Laura's gardening gloves, can't bear to move them, sweetheart." The first time he called me that, I felt warmth spread through me like honey. He made me laugh too, gentle, silly stories about Max stealing his socks or his attempts to make Laura's manicotti and ending up with cheese everywhere. He'd tease me lightly about my Midwestern politeness, and I'd tease him back about Texans thinking everything's bigger in their state. We watched an old movie together one night, Casablanca. Of course, pausing at the same moments to comment, laughing at the same lines. When Rick said, "Here's looking at you, kid," Richard mouthed it along with Bogart, then looked straight into the camera and repeated it to me. I blushed like a schoolgirl. Little gifts started arriving. First, a packet of rare rose seeds he'd happened upon at a nursery near him, hybrid teas in a shade called Moonlight Serenade. Then a handwritten card with a pressed wildflower from his pasture, "Thinking of you today." A week later, a small tin of Texas pecan pralines showed up on my porch with a note. "Laura's favorite, thought you should try the best." Each package felt like proof that I was on his mind even when we weren't talking. I started dressing nicer even on days we didn't video call. I bought a new blouse in soft blue because he'd said blue was his favorite color on me. I got my hair trimmed for the first time in a year, telling the stylist it was just time for a change while secretly hoping Richard would notice on our next call. He did, immediately. "Your hair looks beautiful. You look happy." And I was dangerously, dizzyingly happy. I'd catch myself humming while doing dishes, smiling at nothing while folding laundry. The house felt lighter, as if his voice echoing through the tablet had chased some of the shadows away. I told myself it was just companionship, nothing more. But late at night I'd admit the truth to the dark. I was falling in love, slowly, steadily, completely. I knew it was risky. I'd read the warnings about online relationships, especially for women my age. But Richard never asked for money, never pressured me for personal information beyond what I freely gave. He was patient, respectful, affectionate in the gentlest way. He talked about our future not as a fantasy but as a natural next step. Meeting in person, maybe a trip together someday, even blending our lives if things felt right. "I'm in no rush, Evelyn," he'd say, looking into the camera with those steady eyes. "We've both waited a long time for something good. We can take all the time we need." I believed him. I trusted him with every fragile piece of my heart I thought had died with Harold. I let myself dream again of companionship, of touch, of waking up to someone saying good morning in the same room instead of through a screen. Martha noticed the change in me. Over tea one afternoon, she said, "Evie, you've got a sparkle you haven't had in years. What's going on?" I almost told her. I wanted to gush about Richard, show her his picture, read her the sweet messages. But something held me back, maybe fear that saying it aloud would jinx it, or that she'd worry and warn me. So I just smiled and said, "Springtime, I guess. The garden's coming back to life. If only I'd told her then, if only I'd let someone else see him, vet him, reality check the fairy tale I was living inside." But I didn't. I kept him to myself like a secret treasure, guarding every message, every call, every heartbeat he stirred in me. I was 71 years old, and I was falling in love like a girl, helpless, hopeful, and utterly blind to the danger gathering on the horizon. Because Richard wasn't just filling my lonely evenings. He was studying me, learning exactly what I missed most, and preparing to use it. But in those early months, all I felt was the warmth of his attention, the thrill of being wanted again. I was his completely, long before he ever asked for a single dollar. Dreams of a future together as spring turned to summer, Richard and I settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Our days revolved around each other, even across the miles. He'd wake earlier than meet X's time, and his good morning, beautiful message would be waiting when I shuffled to the kitchen for coffee. I'd send back a photo of the garden in the soft early light or the dew on the rose petals, and he'd reply with something that made me smile all through breakfast. "Those blooms have nothing on you, or can't wait to smell those roses in person with you beside me." We talked about everything now, the way couples do when they're building something real. He told me more about his life in Texas, the ranch he'd bought after retiring, the quiet evenings on the porch watching storms roll in across the plains, the way Max would rest his head on Richard's knee when he felt his human was sad. He shared memories of Laura that didn't make me jealous, but rather made me feel closer to him. How she'd drag him to antique stores, how they'd dance in the kitchen to old country songs. "She'd have liked you," he said once, voice soft. "You've got that same gentle strength." In return, I let him deeper into my world than I'd let anyone since Harold. I showed him via video the sunroom where Harold and I had spent so many mornings, the garden bench we'd bought on our 25th anniversary, even the closet where Harold's clothes still hung because I couldn't bear to move them. Richard never rushed me or suggested I move on. He just listened, nodding, eyes kind. "You loved him well, Evelyn. That's something to be proud of, not hidden." He started weaving me into his future in small, deliberate ways that felt like promises. When I come up, he'd say, and it was always when, "Never if we'll have to take a drive out to that lake you told me about, the one where Harold proposed. I want to see the place that made you say yes to forever." Or "I've been looking at flights for fall October, maybe, when the leaves turn. Would that work for you?" I'd laugh and tell him October was perfect, secretly marking calendars in my head, counting down like a girl waiting for prom. We planned imaginary trips together. He'd pull up maps on his screen and show me routes. A drive through the Ozarks, a week in New England for foliage, even a quiet Christmas in a cabin somewhere snowy. "We could have our own traditions," he said one night, his face glowing in the lamplight on my tablet. "You debake those cookies you told me about, the ones with the cinnamon, and I'd attempt a turkey without burning it." I could see it so clearly. The two of us decorating a tree, laughing over lopsided ornaments, waking up Christmas morning with snow outside and someone warm beside me. He talked about bigger things too, carefully, as if testing the waters. "This house is too big for one person," he said once, panning the camera to show empty guest rooms. "Plenty of space for a garden if someone wanted to expand hers." Another time, "I've been thinking about selling the ranch eventually. Chicago's got good airports, good hospitals, and a certain lady I wouldn't mind being closer to." My heart would pound at those words. Moving? Starting over at 71? With Harold it had felt impossible, but with Richard it felt possible, hopeful even. The gifts kept coming, each one more thoughtful. A gardening book on antique roses with a bookmark at a variety called Evelyn. A soft throw blanket in my favorite shade of sage green for cool Illinois nights when I am not there to keep you warm yet. A necklace arrived one day, a simple silver chain with a small gardenia pendant. The note read, "Because you said they were your favorite, wear it when you think of me." I did, every day, tucking it under my blouse like a secret. I started making small changes around the house without fully admitting why. I cleared out a drawer in the guest room just in case, moved some of Harold's things to storage boxes in the attic, not discarding, just making space. I bought new sheets for the bed, telling myself they were overdue anyway. I even cooked meals I knew Richard liked, testing recipes, imagining serving them to him at my table. Martha noticed everything, of course. She'd drop by 4T and spot the necklace or the new blanket draped over the sofa. "You're glowing, Evie," she said one afternoon, eyes sharp but kind. "This wouldn't he have anything to do with a certain someone you've been texting day and night, would it?" I blushed and deflected, saying only that I'd made a nice friend online. She didn't push, but she watched me with that old friend knowing look that said she'd wait until I was ready to tell. Richard and I had our first date night in August. We dressed up, he in a crisp shirt and tie, me in the blue dress I'd bought specially, and had dinner together over video. I set my tablet at the end of the dining table with candles lit. He did the same. We ate the same meal: steak, baked potatoes, salad, and toasted with wine across the miles. After dinner, we watched It's a Wonderful Life, one of Harold's favorites that Richard claimed to love too, when George Bailey ran through the snow shouting Mary. Richard looked straight into the camera and said quietly, "I feel a little like that lately, like I've been given a second chance I didn't deserve." I cried then, happy tears that startled us both. He waited patiently while I dabbed my eyes, then said, "Don't cry, sweetheart. Or if you do, save some of those tears for when I'm there to wipe them in person." By then I was utterly, completely his. I trusted him the way I'd once trusted Harold, with my days, my memories, my hopes. I believed every story, every plan, every gentle "I love you" that started slipping into our good nights. He never rushed me, never demanded anything. He just kept showing up day after day, filling the empty spaces with warmth and possibility. I told myself it was safe because he hadn't asked for anything. No money, no favors, no pressure, just love, freely given. I see now how skillfully he built that trust, how every shared memory, every future plan, every small gift was a brick in a wall around my heart, one that would keep caution out when the time came to ask for more. He learned what I valued most: security, partnership, a future worth planning for, and mirrored it perfectly in those dreamy summer months. All I felt was joy. I was in love again, deeply and without reservation. I pictured him walking up my front path, imagined the weight of his hand on my back, the sound of his laughter in my kitchen. I believed we were two lucky souls who'd found each other late but not too late. I believed we had time. I believed him. And because I believed, I was ready, eager, even when he finally began to talk about money, about opportunities, about building an even brighter future together. The hook was set so deep I never felt it catch. The introduction to crypto, it started so innocently that I can almost pinpoint the exact evening it happened. We were on one of our long video calls late August, the cicadas loud outside my window, the sun setting gold through the sunroom. Richard had just finished showing me the new trellis he'd built for his climbing roses, and I'd shown him the tomatoes I'd finally harvested after a summer of battling blight. We were both a little proud of our gardens, laughing about how we'd become such devoted dirt diggers in our retirement. Conversation drifted, as it often did, to money, not in a crass way, but in the practical, partnered way Harold and I had always talked about it. I mentioned that the rental property downtown was needing a new roof soon, and I was weighing whether to sell it or dip into savings for the repair. Richard listened thoughtfully, the way he always did, nodding slowly. "You know, Evelyn," he said after a pause, "I've been meaning to tell you about something that has helped me a lot these past few years. After Laura passed, I had to figure out how to make my retirement stretch further than I'd planned. Medical bills, you know." "How it is?" He sighed, and I nodded, remembering Mama's final years. "A friend introduced me to cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, some of the newer platforms. I was skeptical at first. Lord, was I skeptical. Thought it was all gambling and kids in hoodies getting rich overnight. I laughed because that's exactly what I'd thought too. Harold had never trusted anything he couldn't hold in his hand or read about in the Wall Street Journal. But I started small," Richard went on, leaning closer to the camera. "Just a few $1,000s I could afford to lose, and Evelyn, it's grown in ways our old mutual funds never did, steady but with real upside. I've been able to fix up the ranch, help my nieces with college, even set aside more for charities Laura loved. It's given me freedom I didn't expect at this age." He wasn't bragging. His tone was quiet, almost confiding, like he was sharing a hard-won secret with someone he trusted deeply. He pulled up his phone and showed me screenshots, not flashy charts with rockets and moons, but clean, professional-looking dashboards from something called Crypto Ellippa Pro, balances that made my eyes widen. Returns that seemed impossible, yet there they were, dated and time-stamped. I'm not saying it's for everyone, he said quickly, putting the phone down, and I'd never push you. But you're so smart with money, always have been, from everything you've told me about you and Harold. I just thought, maybe it's something you'd want to look into, especially if you're thinking about that roof or wanting to travel more when I finally get up there. He smiled then, soft and hopeful. We could take a long trip somewhere warm. You deserve that. I brushed it off at first, told him I was too old for such things, that CDs and treasury. Bonds had always been good enough for us. But he didn't push. He just said, fair enough. Just promise me you'll keep an open mind. If you ever want to know more, I'm here to walk you through it. No pressure. That night, after we said goodnight, after he told me he loved me and I whispered it back, I couldn't sleep. I sat up in bed with my tablet and searched cryptocurrency. For beginners, article after article talked about volatility, risk, people losing everything. But others, reputable ones, from Forbes and CNBC, spoke of early investors who'd secured their retirements, of Bitcoin going from pennies to tens of thousands. I thought of our careful life with Harold, always safe, always steady, but never abundant in the way that let us splurge without worry. I thought of Richard's screenshots, of the freedom he described. A few nights later, I brought it up again tentatively. Tell me more about that platform you use, I said. Just so I understand. Richard's face lit up, but he stayed calm. He spent the next hour walking me through it like a patient teacher, how blockchain worked in simple terms I could follow, how the app was regulated and insured. He showed me pages that looked official, how he'd started with an amount he could lose and watched it grow slowly at first, then faster as he learned. He emphasized diversification. Never investing more than one could afford, setting aside profits early. It's not magic, he said. It's just a new kind of asset, like stocks were new once. And this platform, Crypto Ellippa Pro, they make it easy for regular folks like us. No day trading, no stress. You put in, you watch it compound, you take out when you're ready. He showed me how to download the app, how to set up two-factor authentication, how to link a bank account securely. He never once said, you should do this. He just gave information, answered every question, and let me lead. I told him I'd think about it. I prayed about it. I even called my financial advisor, the one Harold and I had used for decades, and asked his opinion on crypto. He hemmed and hawed, said it was speculative, but admitted many clients were allocating small percentages now. If you're curious, he said, start with money you can afford to lose, 1 or 2% of your portfolio, no more. That settled it. I had the money savings that had been sitting in a low-interest account turning practically nothing. I'd always been conservative, but Harold and I had taken calculated risks before. The rental property, certain stocks during dips. This felt like one more. I told Richard I was ready to try a small amount. His smile was proud, not triumphant. I'm so proud of you for being open to this, he said. Whatever you decide, I'm here. We set it September 1st. I transferred $20,000 from savings, my heart pounding as I hit confirm. Richard stayed on video the whole time, walking me through each step, reassuring me I could withdraw any time. The next morning, the dashboard showed a small uptick already. By the third day, it read $50,000. I stared at the screen, stunned. I called Richard immediately, voice shaking. It's grown so fast. He laughed, delighted. See? That's the beauty of it. Compound growth in a bull market. You're brilliant, Evelyn. I knew you'd be a natural. I felt brilliant. For the first time since Harold died, I felt powerful, like I was building something again, securing a future not just for myself, but for us. I imagined telling him about it someday over coffee in my sunroom. Look what I did, all on my own. Richard never said, invest more. He just celebrated with me, talked about how proud Laura would have been of my courage, how we might take that trip to Italy sooner than we'd planned. But inside, the seed was planted. The app updated hourly, numbers climbing like vines. And every time they did, Richard was there cheering quietly, loving me more, painting pictures of the life we could have with this new freedom. I didn't see then how perfectly it was all orchestrated. The slow build of trust, the mirroring of my values, the introduction of crypto only after I was deeply, irrevocably in love. I didn't see that the growth wasn't real, that the app was a closed system showing whatever numbers its creators wanted. All I saw was possibility. All I felt was hope, and hope, after years of loneliness, is the most dangerous drug of all. The first investment, I remember the exact moment I hit confirm on that first transfer like it was burned into my memory. It was a crisp September morning, the kind where the air smells of fallen leaves and wood smoke from someone's first fire of the season. I'd been up since dawn, too nervous to sleep much. Richard and I had talked late into the night before he'd walked me through every step again, shown me how to enable the extra security features. On the Crypto Alipa Pro app, reminded me a dozen times that I could stop at any point. "This is your money, Evelyn," he'd said firmly. "You're in control. I'm just here to help." I sat at the kitchen table with my tablet propped up on its stand, a fresh cup of coffee cooling beside me. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional chirp of a chickadee outside the window. Richard was on video in the corner of the screen, sipping his own coffee on his Texas porch, Max's head resting on his foot. He looked calm, patient, proud, like a man watching his partner take a brave step, $20,000. It wasn't everything I had, not even close, but it was a significant chunk of the liquid savings Harold and I had built as a buffer for emergencies. The financial advisor's words echoed in my head. Money you can afford to lose. I could afford to lose it, I told myself. The house was paid off, the rental income was steady, social. Security and Harold's pension covered my monthly needs with room to spare. This was play money, almost a calculated risk, like the duplex we'd bought all those years ago. My finger hovered over the button. Richard didn't push. He just smiled and said, "Whatever you decide, sweetheart, I'm proud of you for even considering it." I pressed confirm. The app showed a little spinning wheel, then a green check mark. Transfer successful. Estimated arrival. 1 - 2 business days. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Richard whooped softly, careful not to startle Max. "You did it." "How do you feel?" "Terrified," I admitted, laughing shakily and excited, like I just jumped off a diving board. "That's exactly how it feels at first," he said. "But you're a strong swimmer, Evelyn. You'll be fine." The next 2 days dragged. I checked the app obsessively every hour at first, then every few minutes. I gardened furiously, pulling weeds that didn't need pulling, just to keep my hands busy. I baked banana bread and took half too. Martha, who eyed me curiously and asked why I was fluttering around like a hummingbird. I told her I was just enjoying the fall weather. On the third morning, I opened the app with trembling fingers, $28,400. I stared, blinked, refreshed again. Still there. Then $31,200. By noon, it was $39,000. By evening, $50,000, $50,000. In 3 days. I called Richard in a panic, half laughing, half crying. It's real? This is really happening?" He was grinning ear to ear, but his voice was steady. "It's real, darling. That's the market doing what it does in a strong cycle. You picked a perfect entry point. I'm so proud of you." We stayed on the call for hours that night. He explained patiently, without condescension, how the particular coin the platform had allocated my funds into was surging because of some partnership announcement with a major payment processor. He showed me news articles, they looked legitimate, charts with upward trends, analyst predictions. It all made sense when he explained it. I'd never understood stocks this quickly when Harold tried to teach me decades ago, but with Richard it felt clear, almost simple. I couldn't stop checking the app. The numbers climbed steadily. $55,000, $62,000, $71,000. Every refresh brought a little dopamine rush, like pulling a slot machine lever and watching cherries line up. I'd text Richard screenshots, and he'd respond instantly with heart emojis and messages like, "Look, at you go," or "We're going to have so much to celebrate when I get there." I felt powerful in a way I hadn't since Harold's death. For 5 years, I'd been managing decline, shrinking savings interest, rising property taxes, the slow erosion of a life built for two. Now I was growing something, building. I imagined telling Harold about it someday, wherever he was watching from. Look what I did, all by myself. I pictured the trips Richard and I could take: Italy, maybe Greece, or that Alaskan cruise we'd loved so much the first time. I pictured paying cash for a new roof on the rental, helping my nieces with their mortgages, maybe even starting a little scholarship in Harold's name. Richard never once said, "Put in more." He didn't need to. The app did the talking, those beautiful green numbers climbing like morning glories up a trellis. And every time they jumped, Richard was there to celebrate with me, to remind me how brilliant I was, how courageous. Most people your age are afraid of anything new, he said. One night, but not my Evelyn. You're extraordinary, extraordinary. No one had called me that in decades. A week after the initial investment, the balance hit $85,000. I took a screenshot and stared at it for a long time. $65,000 in profit. In 1 week, I called Richard, I think. I want to add a little more, just to see. His smile was soft, proud. Whatever feels right to you, sweetheart. I'll be right here. I transferred another $30,000 the next day. The growth accelerated. $150,000, $220,000, $300,000. I started sleeping with the tablet on my nightstand so I could check first thing in the morning. I'd wake to new highs and text Richard before I even got out of bed. He'd respond instantly, no matter how early. Good morning, my wealthy lady. Look at those numbers dance. I felt young again, reckless in the best way. I bought a new dress online, something bright and flowing I'd never have chosen before, and wore it on our next video date. Richard's eyes lit up. You look like springtime, he said. Keep that dress for our first real date. I want to see it in person. I believed him. I believed everything. I didn't see the pattern yet, how the gains were too steady, too dramatic, how the app never showed real-time market prices from anywhere I could verify, how Richard always had an explanation for every surge, every minor dip that quickly recovered. I didn't notice that I'd stopped talking about it with anyone else, not Martha, not my financial advisor, not even the widows group. It was my secret joy, shared only with the man I loved. The hook was buried deep now. Every green number tightened it. Every celebration from Richard pulled it deeper. I was no longer just in love. I was addicted, and the appetite theirs and mine was only beginning to grow. The rush of gains by mid-September. The Crypto Ellippa Pro app had become my constant companion, a glowing oracle on my tablet that whispered promises of wealth with every refresh. What started as a cautious $20,000 experiment had snowballed into something intoxicating, a whirlwind of green numbers that climbed faster than the Virginia creeper overtaking the fence in my backyard. I'd check it first thing in the morning, bleary-eyed and still in my nightgown, heart racing as the dashboard loaded. $92. Ling ling ling. I added that second $30,000 the day after the first milestone, watching it integrate seamlessly into the portfolio. The app's algorithm, Richard explained it so patiently, with charts and simple analogies like compound interest on steroids, allocated it across a diversified basket of coins, some stable ones for safety, others high-growth tokens riding a market wave. It's like planting seeds in fertile soil during a perfect rain, he'd say on our calls, his Texas drawl wrapping around the words like comfort food. You water it, the sun shines, and suddenly you've got a harvest you can't believe. Harvest, that word stuck with me. After years of tending my literal garden, nurturing roses through black spot and Japanese beetles, coaxing tomatoes from stubborn clay, here was a garden that bloomed without dirt under my nails or sweat on my brow. No weeding, no frost worries, just watch, wait, and reap. By the end of the first full week, my total balance read $220,000, nearly 3 times my initial stake. I paced the sunroom, phone in hand, calling Richard in a voice that trembled with disbelief. 220,000 in 7 days. Harold would have had a heart attack in a good way. Richard laughed, that deep, rumbling laugh that made my cheeks warm even through the screen. He'd be proud, sweetheart, and Laura too. This is what smart people do with opportunities. You're not gambling. You're leveraging knowledge. But listen, don't get ahead of yourself. Take profits if you want. Pull some out now, celebrate. I didn't, not yet. The rush was too sweet, like the first sip of champagne at midnight on New Year's. I wanted more. That weekend, I sat down with my old financial folder, the one Harold had meticulously organized with colored tabs for accounts, bonds, stocks, and started calculating. The rental property downtown was generating $1,800 a month after expenses, but the tenants were complaining about drafts. Monday morning, I transferred the $50,000 into Crypto Ellippa Pro. Richard walked me through it live, his face filling half the screen while the app took over the other. Perfect timing, he murmured as the funds hit. There's a big announcement today, some tech giant integrating one of these coins into their wallet. Watch it. Fly, and fly it did. Within hours, $285,000 total. By Tuesday night, $410,000. I couldn't eat supper that night. My stomach was a knot of exhilaration. I poured a rare glass of wine, something red and velvety Harold had liked, and toasted the empty sunroom chair where Richard would soon sit. To us, I whispered, to the life we're building. Emboldened, I went bigger. The home equity line Harold and I had opened years ago for emergencies sat unused at a low 3.9% interest. Why not borrow against the house we'd paid off sweat and sacrifice? It was worth $450,000 now, easy. I applied online, approved in minutes for 10000, and wired $75,000 straight to the app. Richard cautioned me gently, only what you're comfortable with, love. This is for our future, not a race. But his eyes sparkled. Imagine paying cash for that Italy trip, or helping your nieces buy their first homes. You'd be the hero, Aunt. The numbers didn't lie. With the new infusion, the portfolio hit $620,000 midweek. I was obsessed. The tablet came everywhere, propped on the counter while I chopped vegetables, glancing every 5 minutes, beside the bathtub during my evening soak, charging on the nightstand so notifications buzzed me awake at AM with +12 overnight surge. Richard and I had portfolio dates video calls where we'd sip tea and watch the live ticker together. He'd share his own gains, always a bit ahead of mine, making me feel like his prized student, explain dips as healthy corrections that always rebounded stronger. See? Back up 18% already. Trust the process. Martha dropped by unannounced one crisp afternoon, catching me in the garden with the app open on my phone. Evie, you look 10 years younger. What's the secret? New cream? I laughed and almost told her, showed her the screenshots, gushed about Richard's guidance. But something stopped me. It was our thing, mine and Richard's, magical, too good to share with skeptics. Just the fresh air, I said instead, pocketing the phone. Total invested by month's end, $400,000, pulled from savings, stocks, bonds, home equity, even a small dip into the rental reserve. The dashboard glowed. $1.5 million. $1.5 million in less than 30 days. I sat on the sunroom floor that night, back against the warm radiator, tears streaming down. My face as Richard cheered through the tablet. You did this, Evelyn. You're a millionaire. We're millionaires. I love you so much. This is our future, trips, security, each other. I believed it utterly. I felt invincible, reborn. The lonely widow was gone. In her place stood a savvy investor, a woman in love with a man who saw her brilliance. I ordered takeout from Salvatore's, our first millionaire feast, steak and tiramisu, eating alone but texting Richard bites, him sending back photos of his own steak in Texas. We planned his visit for November. I'll fly up, stay a week, we'll walk the garden, celebrate in person, maybe withdraw a chunk and go out proper. In that euphoric haze, I ignored the tiny warning whispers. Why no tax forms yet? Why couldn't I find Crypto Alipapro reviews outside Richard's links? Why did the gains feel too smooth, never a real crash like the news reported? Richard soothed every doubt. New platform under the radar. Smart money gets in early. I was all in heart, soul, and every penny I could scrape. The rush wasn't just money. It was validation. After years of quiet widowhood, I was winning big, and Richard was my coach, my love, my everything. If only I'd known the harvest was fake, a digital mirage designed to fatten the pig before slaughter, that every green number was a lie. My $400,000 vanished into scammers' pockets the moment it transferred, that the real crash was coming, not in the app but in my life. But in those heady days of September, all I felt was the wind of fortune at my back, carrying me toward a dream I could almost touch. Chapter 14. The moment it cracked, October arrived with a chill in the air and a blaze of color in the maples lining my street. The garden was winding down, roses giving their last defiant blooms, tomatoes finally spent after a generous season. Inside the house, though, everything felt electric. The Crypto Alipapro dashboard had become my sunrise and sunset, my weather report and horoscope all in one. Every morning I'd wake to new highs, $1.62 million, $1.78 million. $1.91 million. Richard and I had started calling it our little miracle, half joking, but with real wonder in our voices. We were planning his visit in earnest now. November 12th, he'd booked a flight into O'Hare, rented a car so he could drive the last stretch to my door without rushing. I'd cleared the guest room completely, bought new towels in the soft sage green he liked, Even hung a fresh set of curtains so the morning light would fall gently across the bed. I'd daydream about that first moment, him stepping onto the porch with his suitcase, that warm smile I knew so well from the screen now real and close enough to touch. We'd withdraw a nice chunk, maybe 200,000 to celebrate properly. A weekend in Chicago, dinner at a place with a view of the lake, perhaps a little shopping for something special to mark the occasion. One crisp Thursday morning, with the balance sitting pretty at $2.1 million, I decided it was time, not to empty the account, never that, but to pull out enough to pay off the home equity loan I taken, cover the rental roof repairs without worry, and have a cushion for our celebration. I wanted to feel the money in my real bank account again, to know it was tangible. Richard had assured me a dozen times that withdrawals were simple. Just request it, a quick verification for security, and funds hit your bank in 3 to 5 days. I've done it myself, easy as pie. I opened the app, heart fluttering with anticipation more than nerves. The withdrawal tab glowed invitingly. I selected $150. Oh, conservative, I thought. Plenty for debts and fun, leaving over $1.9 million still growing. I filled in my bank routing and account numbers, the same ones I'd used for deposits, double-checked every digit, and hit submit. The little wheel spun. Then a yellow banner appeared. Withdrawal request received, processing initiated. I texted Richard immediately, just requested $150,000. Feeling official now, his reply came fast. That's my girl. Smart move, locking in some profits. You'll see it soon. Congratulations, millionaire. I waited. Refreshed the app every few minutes. By evening, the request status had changed to pending verification. A small note underneath read, for accounts with recent high-growth activity, additional compliance checks are required to prevent fraud. Estimated completion, 24-48 hours, a tiny prickle of unease, but Richard soothed it on our call that night. Totally normal, sweetheart. Regulations these days, money laundering rules and all that. I had the same thing on my last big withdrawal. They just need a little extra to clear it. Patience. The next day, still pending. Then Saturday, a new message in the app's inbox. To complete processing and release funds, a security deposit of $50,000 is required to verify account ownership and cover potential tax withholding. This amount is fully refundable upon successful withdrawal. My stomach dropped. 50,000. More? I'd never heard of such a thing. I screenshotted it and sent it to Richard. He called me right away, voice calm as ever. Ah, yeah, I've seen that before. It's frustrating, but it's their way of making sure no one's hacking high-value accounts. Think of it like a hold on a big check at the bank. They release it once everything clears. I had to do $35,000 once. Got every penny back plus my withdrawal 3 days later. Annoying, but worth it for the safety. I didn't have $50,000 liquid anymore. Everything accessible had already gone into the app. I told him that, voice small. He paused, then said gently, well, only if you want to, love. But if you're serious about getting that money out soon, our celebration, paying off debts, you could borrow it short term. I'd send it myself if I weren't tied up in a big position right now, or maybe ask a close friend. Family? Just temporary. You'll have it back in days, with interest if you want. I sat in the sunroom long after we hung up, staring at the garden going dormant. The roses looked suddenly fragile, petals browning at the edges. 50,000 felt enormous, but compared to $2.1 million. It was nothing, a speed bump, and Richard was right. We had plans, real plans. I called Martha, my oldest friend, the one person who'd never judged me, who'd lent money before when the furnace died unexpectedly years ago. I drove to her house that afternoon, hands tight on the wheel, rehearsing how to explain without sounding reckless. I didn't tell her everything. Not about Richard, not about the full $400,000 already in. I said I'd found a private investment opportunity through a trusted contact, that it was performing amazingly, and I needed a short-term bridge loan for a processing fee. Promised her I'd repay with generous interest in a week, maybe 2. I showed her the app balance on my phone, $2.1 million glowing in green. Her eyes widened. But she looked worried too. Evie, this looks too good. Are you sure it's legitimate? I brushed it off with a laugh I didn't feel. It's regulated, Martha. Richard's been using it for years. I'm just being cautious, taking some profits early. She hesitated, then wrote the check 50000 from her and Tom's retirement savings. Only because it's you, she said, hugging me tight, and only if you promise to get it back quick and maybe let me meet this Richard someday. I promised, both throat thick. Back home, I transferred the money that same day. The app accepted it instantly. Status changed to verification in progress, expected completion within 72 hours. Richard was ecstatic on our call. You're incredible. So close now, darling. I can't wait to hold you when this all lands. 3 days. Later, another message. Additional compliance review required due to international transfer flags. Please submit $75,000 for advanced tax compliance and insurance bond. Fully refundable. I felt the floor tilt. 75,000. I had nothing left. Credit cards maxed from smaller transfers I'd forgotten about in the frenzy. The rental reserve drained. I called Richard in tears. He sounded sympathetic, almost frustrated. On my behalf, I'm so sorry, love. They've tightened things lately, new IRS rules. I had a similar extra step last year. It's the last hurdle, I promise. Once this clears, you'll have full access, no more fees, ever. We can withdraw whatever we want for our life together. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't ask Martha again, not after only days. But the idea of walking away from $2.1 million, our future, for want of $75,000 felt insane. I went back to Martha the next afternoon, shaking, and told her more this time. Not everything, but enough. The fees, the promises, how close I was. She listened on her porch swing, face growing pale. When I finished, she took my hands in hers, hands that had held mine since we were girls riding bicycles on these same streets. Evie, she said softly, eyes wet, this isn't real. This is what they call a pig butchering scam. They show you fake gains to make you invest everything, then invent fees to squeeze the last drops. That money on the screen, it's not there. It never was. I pulled away, angry, terrified. No, you don't understand. Richard isn't coming, honey. Richard isn't real. Or if he is, he's not who you think. I drove home in a daze, refusing to believe her. I called Richard, sobbing, begging for proof, for help. That night I sat in the dark sunroom, tablet glowing accusingly. The balance still showed $2.17 million, mocking me. I refreshed until the numbers blurred through tears. The crack had appeared small at first, a hairline fracture in the perfect dream. But it was spreading fast, and everything I'd built my hope on was about to shatter. Chapter 15. The Truth Revealed. I drove home from Martha's house that afternoon in a fog, her words echoing like a death knell, pig butchering scam. The money isn't real. Richard isn't coming. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, tears blurring the familiar streets I'd known since childhood. No, she was wrong. She had to be wrong. Richard loved me. He'd spent months listening to me, celebrating with me, planning our life. Scammers didn't send gardenia pendants or remember that you liked your coffee with just a dash of cream. They didn't stay up until midnight talking about old movies and grief and dreams. But the seed of doubt, once planted, grew fast. I sat in the driveway for a long time, engine off, staring at the house Harold and I had built together. The porch light I'd left on for decades out of habit now felt mocking, waiting for a man who would never arrive. Finally, I went inside, tablet in hand, and opened the Crypto Alipa Pro app one more time. The balance still glowed, $2.17 million. I refreshed it over and over, as if the act could make the withdrawal go through. Nothing changed except a new banner at the top, urgent. Final compliance deposit required within 48 hours to avoid account suspension. I called Richard, no answer. Texted him the screenshot, begged him to call me. An hour passed, too. His responses, when they came, were short. In a meeting, love, we'll call tonight. Then nothing. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the sunroom with every light on, tablet open beside Harold's empty chair, searching the internet for the first time with clear eyes. I typed Crypto Alipa Pro scam. Nothing too new, maybe, or deliberately obscure. Then cryptocurrency withdrawal fees scam. Hundreds of results poured in. Articles from the FTC, FBI warnings. Reddit threads full of stories that read like carbon copies of mine. Fake platforms, fake gains, fake love affairs designed to fatten the victim with impossible profits before the slaughter. Pig butchering. The name made me sick. I read until dawn, each story a knife twist. Widows, widowers, lonely. pouring life savings into apps that showed millions, only to lose everything chasing fees, taxes, verification deposits. Photos stolen from random social media profiles, scripts for romance that lasted months, even years, victims who remortgaged homes, emptied retirement accounts, borrowed from family just like me. One woman in California had lost $900,000. Another in Australia had taken her own life after realizing the man she'd fallen in love with was a syndicate in Southeast Asia. I closed the tablet and vomited in the kitchen sink. Morning came gray and cold. Richard finally called video, his face filling the screen as always. But something was different. His smile seemed strained. His eyes avoided the camera. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry about the delay. These new regulations are a nightmare, but we're almost there if you can just get that last 75000. I cut him off, voice shaking. Is any of this real, Richard? The money? You? Silence, then a sigh. Evelyn, of course it's real. Why would you even? Because I looked it up, I said, louder now. Pig butchering, stolen photos, fake platforms. Tell me it isn't true. Tell me you're booking that November flight right now. His face hardened just a flicker, but I saw it. You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. This is why I didn't want you talking to other people about it. They don't understand. They're jealous of what we've built. Jealous? I laughed, a broken sound. I'm about to lose my house, Richard. I borrowed from my best friend. I sold everything Harold and I worked for. If this is real, send me proof. Send me your driver's license, your plane ticket, anything. He hesitated. I can't do that right now. Security reasons. You know how careful we have to be with. Identity theft. I hung up. I blocked him on everything: phone, messages, the chat app. Then I sat on the floor and sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes swelled shut. The gardenia pendant, the one he'd sent, lay on the coffee table where I'd thrown it. I picked it up, ready to hurl it across the room, but instead clutched it to my chest like the fool I was. Martha came over that afternoon without calling first. She found me curled in Harold's recliner, wrapped in the Afghan we'd bought on our Mackinac Island trip. She didn't say I told you so. She just sat beside me, held my hand, and let me cry until there were no tears left. Over the next days, the full scope sank in, the $400. 000 was gone, irretrievable. The bank confirmed, overseas accounts layered through cryptocurrency wallets. The FBI took my report kindly but warned recovery was near zero. These groups are sophisticated, ma'am, often in countries without extradition. The home equity loan payments started immediately. I couldn't recover them, and the regular mortgage I'd taken to free up more cash. Foreclosure notices arrived within weeks. I sold the rental property at a loss just to stop the bleeding, paid Martha back slowly, in painful chunks, by pawning jewelry Harold had given me over the years. The pearl earrings for our 30th anniversary, the gold bracelet from our first big stock windfall. Our friendship survived, but it's strained now. She looks at me sometimes with pity I can't bear. The house is still mine for now. I've taken in a renter, a quiet young teacher who pays on time and doesn't ask questions. I live in the smaller bedroom. The master feels too big, too full of ghosts. The garden is neglected. I can't bring myself to tend roses that bloomed while I destroyed everything Harold and I built. Some days the shame is physical, like a weight on my chest that makes breathing hard. I avoided church for months, couldn't face the kind questions or the whispers. When I finally went back, the pastor hugged me and said, "Grace is for all of us, Evelyn, even when we fall." I cried in the pew like a child. I reported everything: screenshots, messages, the app details to the FTC, IC3, anyone who would listen. Maybe it'll help catch them. Maybe it'll warn someone else. But it doesn't bring back the money or the trust or the version of myself who believed in second chances. Richard's profiles vanished. Overnight, of course. The photos he used stolen, I learned, from a retired engineer in Europe who had no idea his face was romancing widows across America. I kept one thing: the packet of rare rose seeds he'd sent early on. I planted them last spring, more out of defiance than hope. They're growing now, stubborn green shoots pushing through the soil Harold and I amended together for decades. I don't know if they'll bloom, but I water them anyway, because that's what you do after loss. You keep watering what little is left, even when you're not sure anything beautiful will come of it. If you're rereading this and you rail only if someone online is offering you the exact kindness you've been missing, please talk to a friend first. Show someone the messages. Google the warnings. Because love shouldn't cost you everything. I was rich once, not just in money, but in love, in security, in a life carefully built over decades. Now I'm in debt, ashamed, and lonelier than ever. But I'm still here, still breathing, still watering those roses, and maybe that's the beginning of something, even if I can't see it yet. Months have turned in 2 years since that shattering day when Martha E.'s words cracked open the illusion I wrapped myself in. It's January 2026 now, and I'm 74, still in the same house, though it feels smaller these days, pared down to essentials after selling off so much to settle the debts. The renter, Miss Emily, has become a quiet fixture. Her footsteps on the stairs remind me I'm not entirely alone, even if our conversations rarely go beyond the weather or the mail, but emotional recovery. Oh, that's a winding road, full of switchbacks and dead ends, with views that sometimes take your breath away and other times leave you staring at sheer cliffs. At first, there was no recovery, just survival. The weeks after blocking Richard, or whoever he really was, were a blur of numbness punctuated by sharp stabs of rage and grief. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding from dreams where I was chasing digital numbers that dissolved like smoke. Shame was my constant shadow. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror without seeing a fool, a woman who'd traded decades of careful living for a fairy tale typed on a screen. I avoided the garden entirely that first winter, the roses dormant under snow, the trellis sagging like my own spine. Martha checked on me daily, bringing soups and sitting in silence when words failed. She dragged me to church one Sunday when I hadn't left the house in a week, and the hymns felt like salt in wounds, but the pastor's sermon on forgiveness for others and ourselves planted a tiny seed. I started small because that's all I could manage. The FBI agent who'd taken my report suggested a victim support group for financial scams. I resisted at first. Group therapy sounded like admitting defeat, but Martha drove me to the first meeting at the community center. It was a circle of folding chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups, and faces like mine. Older folks mostly, eyes hollowed by betrayal. Hearing their stories, romance scams, investment frauds, family members who'd vanished with inheritances, was like looking into a mirror. One woman, Clara, had lost her home to a similar scheme. She spoke of the anger that burned hot at first, then simmered into self-forgiveness. "It's not your fault," she said. "They prey on hope, and hope isn't a weakness, it's human." I cried through half the meeting, but I went back the next week and the next. Talking helped peel back the layers of isolation. In the group, I shared bits of my story: the loneliness after Harold, the thrill of Richard's messages, the rush of those fake gains. No one judged. They nodded, shared their own if-onlys. Over time, I started seeing patterns: how scammers exploit vulnerability, how loneliness makes us blind to red flags. It didn't erase the pain, but it shifted the blame from me alone to a system that allows these predators to thrive. I even volunteered to speak at a senior center seminar on scam prevention, turning my nightmare into a warning for others. Standing there, voice steady as I described the tactics, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Therapy came next. My doctor recommended a counselor specializing in grief and trauma, covered partly by Medicare. Thank goodness. Sessions were weekly at first, in a cozy office with tissues always at hand. Dr. Ellis didn't push. She let me unpack at my own pace. We talked about Harold's death, how it had hollowed me out, leaving space for desperation. "Loneliness isn't just absence," she said. "It's a void that echoes." We explored trust, how Richard had mirrored Harold's steadiness to hook me, how rebuilding trust starts with myself. Homework was simple. Journal 3 things I'm grateful for each day, no matter how small. At first, it was basics: a hot cup of tea, the Cardinals at the feeder, Martha's unwavering friendship. Over months, it grew. The way Miss Emily's laughter filters down from upstairs, the satisfaction of balancing my shrunken checkbook without panic. The garden became my therapy too. Those rose seeds from Richard, I almost dug them up in anger that first spring, but something stopped me. Maybe defiance, maybe a refusal to let him taint one more thing. I tended them carefully, mulching against weeds, staking against wind, whispering encouragements like they were children. When the first buds appeared, pale pink, fragrant as hope, they bloomed on Harold's birthday. I sat beside them that evening, fingers tracing petals, and felt a softening in my chest. Not forgiveness for the scammers, but for myself. The roses didn't care about my mistakes. They just grew. So could I. Small victories built momentum. I rejoined the book club at the library, forcing myself to speak up even when shame whispered to stay quiet. One member, a widow named Louise, became a friend. We walk the neighborhood loop most mornings, sharing stories of our late husbands without the raw ache of fresh loss. I started volunteering at the church food pantry, packing boxes for families in need. Giving back even from my diminished means reminded me I still had value beyond my bank account. Last summer, I even took a bus tour to the botanical gardens in St. Louis with Martha. No luxury, but the sight of exotic flowers under glass domes felt like a reclaiming of joy. There are setbacks, of course. Holidays are hard. I still set two places at the table sometimes, then catch myself and weep. Online anything triggers paranoia. I double-check every email, avoid social media like the plague, and the debt lingers. Minimum payments on the remaining loans eat my fixed income, but I've negotiated lower interest with the bank and the renter's check covers. The gap. Financially, recovery is slow. Emotionally, it's a marathon. But here's the truth: I've clawed my way too. I'm not broken beyond repair. The loneliness is softer now, edged with acceptance rather than desperation. I talk to Harold still out loud in the garden, telling him about the roses, the group, the small steps forward. I imagine him smiling, saying, "That's my Evie, steady as ever." And Richard? He fades a little more each year, a cautionary ghost rather than a haunting one. Emotional recovery isn't a straight line. It's a garden you tend daily, weeding out regret, nurturing resilience. Some days the blooms are sparse, but others burst with color you never expected. I'm still watering, still growing. And if there's a lesson in all this beyond the scams, it's that hope, real hope, comes from within, not from a stranger's screen. It comes from friends like Martha, from groups that understand, from seeds planted in spite of everything. I'm not the woman I was before Harold died, or before Richard shattered me. But I'm someone new, scarred, yes, but stronger in the breaks, and on good days that feels like enough. It's January 7th, 2026, and I'm sitting in the sunroom with a cup of coffee cream, no sugar, the way Harold always made it for me. Outside, the garden is sleeping under a thin blanket of snow, but those stubborn roses from the seed packet are still alive beneath the mulch, their roots holding on through another Midwest winter. I've learned to trust roots more than blooms these days. The debts are almost gone now. One final payment next month will close the home equity loan, and the house will be truly mine again. No liens, no shadows. Miss Emily, my renter, moved out last fall to get married, but she left behind a thank you note and a potted African violet that sits on the windowsill, blooming purple against the gray. Martha and I meet for coffee every Thursday. We don't talk about the scam much anymore, but when we do, it's with the ease of old friends who've weathered worse storms together. I still go to the scam survivors group, though now I am the one pouring coffee and reminding newcomers that the shame fades faster than they think. Ivy's spoken at 3 more senior centers and even helped the local police department create a handout on romance and investment scams. They used my story anonymously, of course, but knowing it might spare even one person the heartbreak I endured gives the pain a purpose. I've dipped a cautious toe back into the world of companionship. Not online, no, thank you. There's a widower named George at church who brings me tomatoes from his greenhouse in summer and asks about my roses with genuine interest. We've had coffee after service a few times, taken a slow walk around the park once when the leaves were turning. Nothing rushed, nothing promised, just 2 old souls enjoying each other's company on a Sunday afternoon. It feels safe, it feels possible. Some nights I still talk to Harold out loud, no shame anymore. I tell him about the roses, about George's terrible jokes, about how I finally threw out his old cardigan last spring because the moths had won. I tell him I'm sorry for risking what we built, and I tell him thank you for teaching me how to build again, slower this time, on ground I test myself. I'm not rich anymore, not in the way I once was, but I have enough: a paid-off home, a small pension, social security, the rental income trickling back now that the roof is fixed. More importantly, I have peace, hard-won, fragile on bad days but real. I have friends who know the worst of me and stay anyway. I have a garden that keeps teaching me about resilience. And I have myself back, the Evelyn who is cautious but not closed, grieving but not drowned, hopeful but no longer blind. So too you reading this, yes you, the one scrolling late at night, missing someone, tempted by a kind message from a stranger who seems to understand you perfectly. Please hear me, be careful. Love can be real and second chances do exist, but they shouldn't cost you your security, your savings, or your self-respect. Real people don't hide behind excuses. Real love doesn't rush you toward financial decisions. Real partners want to meet your friends, see your home, sit across the table from you in daylight, talk to someone you trust in real life, show them the messages, Google the warnings. If it feels too perfect, too fast, too isolated, pause. Step back, protect the life you've built or the one you're still building. You deserve love that adds to your world, not one that risks taking it all away. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but if it helps even one of you stay safe, it was worth every tear I shed reliving it. If this moved you, touched you, or made you think twice before clicking send on that next transfer, please like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories. There are so many of us out there, ordinary people caught in extraordinary traps, and every voice that speaks up makes the next victim a little harder to find. Stay safe, stay wise, and keep tending your own garden because the roots you grow today are the strength you'll stand on tomorrow. With hope, Evelyn Thompson, January 7th, 2026.